you hear me? I'd like to call this meeting to order. Thank you very much, Simon Adler, for being our greeter today. Is that too loud? Sorry? Is this too loud? Okay, good. Who am I going to check on today? Mac, how's your voice?
I never went.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land, glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Well done. Please grab a glass. Join me in a toast to the Queen.
Queen.
And to Canada. And to the Kitchener Westmount Rotary. We're getting more specific. Please bow your heads. As we meet today, let us be mindful of our neighbors to the south in Texas and the Caribbean. May we pray for those who have lost loved ones and help in whatever way we can those who have lost their homes. May we also remember how fortunate we are to eat regularly each day, to be healthy, and to have very comfortable homes to live in. Many of our brothers and sisters around the world do not eat regularly, do not have good health, and have no home to speak of. We are incredibly blessed in many ways, so let us remember that the greatest blessings of all are kindness, compassion, and generosity. Amen. If you're a Rotarian and you have brought a guest today, would you please introduce him or her?
I'll introduce two guests today who I have no idea why they came because they've heard this a million times, but it's Stephanie Rose, my wife, and Derek Corey, my work wife. Derek's the Executive VP of IC Water, so he's here to test me, I guess.
Welcome very much. Anybody else? Sergeant at Arms Rick, do we have anybody else we need to introduce?
I don't believe so, although I would like to sort of welcome officially, I guess, Karen Spencer.
Absolutely.
Who's officially made it through the process, and Karen is at the back somewhere.
Karen, give us a wave. Karen is our newest member. Yeah, if you haven't met Karen, you should introduce yourself. She'd love to get to know you. And as our guests, would you please lead us to the buffet?
Hey, Rick.
Did you now?
Guest or no guest? We got it now. Summer, you know. So much going on, and really good. Yeah, down there doing well there. Enjoying retirement, living it up. Yeah.
Well, that's all big. Is any of that letter of credit?
It's mostly
What long did you have a copy?
resolution.
Tried to
Yes, I believe we did that last year. I think we did that. So Neil, for instance, bought like 20 tickets, and so we processed them. I don't think we did them.
I was just talking about Jerome was doing that. So between the three of you, I heard that you had
We had only 6 drawn in.
Not critical.
Yeah, now the problem, so if we go to join except one contract.
Club, we just have one.
Yeah, good, now.
As long as we get the
Not working?
Turned out we set it all up and then we had to go away.
You don't need to recount because I don't
There may be no fish for red, no gray.
the Atlantic. We were hiked over like this. Same date. Remember the rock you can things like they can do everything's right with Watching you That's okay.
Big boobs. Funny story. I went to this guy go deep sea fishing. He sold me on the idea of supposed to got that.
Lined up checking out this parking lot jam. Although, just getting them this morning was a challenge.
Not long enough.
All of a sudden the traffic just goes crazy.
You asked the guy,
Which is why you want to have a house right there for you.
where the life jackets were, and then he didn't speak English anymore. We got a little boat. Now, we had booked this 48 work for these registry rock. And then finally, had to go something. They were going there. Got on the big boat. Big American guy. He's smoking a cigar that's the size of a baby's arm. And he's chewing this down, and the smell of the cigar, undulating waves, just going that way. We actually started taking off. This boat wasn't well maintained, so you can imagine that most boats probably aren't. Smoke and pour in the back and just come back. So I've got this easy smoke using really cheap terrible cigar and the bait button. You're sitting in the back of the boat and you've got that smell. So we didn't even have a half long undulating wave and then we started moving. I don't remember. I spent most of the time peering over the side of the boat.
Do we have the fish now or not yet?
No, a couple more minutes.
Oh, okay.
They're making a whole pan though. They came back in. They hadn't even stopped. He goes in the water. He was in the water probably like 30 feet before he should have been.
And then when we were out there, we had water spout tornadoes.
Pretty good except for the first Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
Yeah, Jim was.
You're okay with the rest? Yeah. These guys were half an hour in, they were half by. I mean, people catching them on, like, John, you want to come reel this in? I'm like, no!
I've only signed up for
Yeah, there's a lot here.
Yeah, we're making it really good.
No. Not here.
I'm a fish.
They used to be on Friday.
Sounds good to me. Ask Derek, he's the man with the English.
Do we have an impeachment process?
Good job. Might have been.
Muscles are great. So what we would do is we'll donate the Char and we'll donate a bunch of muscles. And he wants to I'd like them done just steamed in a white wine, cream sauce with a lot of garlic, shallot.
You know, when Bill Stevens did this, he had really nice stickers.
Didn't the last time he was right here?
Wednesday morning, Wednesday
Back straight up. Back up.
What's the capacity there?
Every morning, occasionally get there, styrofoam box, sitting in my parking spot. He's a good guy.
It'll be a way better.
He's always been a good friend of ours.
I've always
Always
Here's my notes. Binder. You can get that done either. But I have to have it back so it goes in my file.
I know one of the industry that here it comes.
You really hate me.
Probably. As we sit there and we tell them, kind of big brother of the industry. They don't necessarily have waste of time.
I recall looking around at
He's not a guy, it's not a guy that.
Okay. Because we've had another came separately, I'm forgetting why. Yeah, this is the so 486 plus 60. Well, I think we end up
Bigger play with a net.
That's always and it's very child. I get, the week that's what they wanted to get away at. And right now, after they were able to get
space.
It's not like never walk out that. They played them this weekend. One of them was better than the other. Remember, Diablo was not as nice as the other one. The other one had twice as many people on it. So they preferred Diablo.
They would go to the club there. I wouldn't get them to they buy a certain number
Oh, yeah.
I just never wanted to know whether we had.
Yeah, they did that. They did that thing.
That was her. Yeah, I think it's the first time she's been with us.
Atlantic side, that's it.
Yeah, we.
Yeah.
All those names.
2 inches of rain in 3 days?
With heart on there.
Yeah.
He came down there.
Yeah, yeah.
The other one, the other one that I think he's gonna get the heart.
Oh no, I got you.
All the residents are filling up already.
Well, you know what?
I got none left. Yeah, get behind me.
I'll talk to you when we get down there.
Yeah, you're there. We'll probably be there I'll let you know when you get a restaurant.
I'm gonna get some more. Okay. Well, I'm not sure. That's fine. We got more. We have to.
We're not gonna use it.
Yeah.
We won't be there till.
We'll touch base. No.
He looks like he's put a deal 2 footer right now.
Char, and we do have an SCG. Yeah, because the way we baby
Where you are in the Florida.
Yeah, we used to always go to the back. Then after that, that's when we just right in the dryer. The last few, we never
Oh, the one that goes talking to Oregon before a meeting. The Johnson before.
Well, the funny thing is, we got here first time this summer. uniforms on. They look like they got us.
That would be my husband. I gotta get my $52.
Kids are whatever, pick them up from school, and they wouldn't use a cab. So, no, Rachel won't go in a cab. Vehicle that comes up, she gets in. Anyway,
You might have
John will not know.
One project that we done every report.
It's not exactly formula like that.
It was a big one. I put it in, that would be a receiver. But every year, it's
He said he's getting very busy with his car.
That's like a fish
easier for like regularly. We worked on some files together.
Just trying to put the back on
Very talented. Guy? Not as well. He's retired now? Yeah.
While you finish up your dessert, I'll continue on with our club business. Birthdays this week. Ed Pawarek. I don't know if many of you who are members now remember Ed, but Ed Pawarek has a birthday on September the 15th. He's a past president. Jim Kibble was telling me Ed had surgery probably about 2 weeks ago. I think it was quadruple bypass surgery. And he struggled with some other health issues. So I'm sure if you know Ed, he'd love to hear from you, and you could wish him a happy birthday on September the 15th. We sent him a card and a little gift certificate after his surgery, and he's still an honorary member and a really great guy. So September 15th is Ed Pawarek's birthday. And Paul, where are you? Did you remember Louise's birthday? Yeah, you did, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's
Never
today.
forget that.
We celebrated it actually yesterday.
Did you? Okay, good. I knew you were on it.
Too many details. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome. Sure you did.
Should we remind me a number of times?
And wedding anniversaries, Rick and Janice Bolson. 34 years. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
She's the same.
Yes, she is. She worked and I played golf, so there you go.
Is that right?
That's the way it went down.
Marriage made in heaven. Simon and Ruth Adler, September the 6th, am I correct?
Yeah.
Well done. Would 36 be the right number? You must have got married very young.
Oh, look at me.
In your early teens. And Tom and Nancy Geary, 61 years on September the 8th.
Wow.
For those of you who don't know Tom, he's an honorary member. He's just an amazing guy. He was, a pilot in the war, and he's got tons of skills to just work up a kid's ability. Really, really cool guy. So if you ever meet him at a meeting, you should get to know him. He's a great guy. He's got a million stories. Club anniversaries. John Vickery. Did you know this was your club anniversary?
I did not.
Guess how many years you've been a member?
15?
17.
Oh.
17 years.
You missed 2 years.
Spencer Yule's been with the club 4 years. He's on a bit of a sabbatical now, but he's coming back. Bill Green. Guess how many years you've been with the club, Bill? Where are you, Bill?
Over here.
Oh, there you are.
I would say almost the same as John.
Exactly the same as John. September the 13th. And Judy Nair. Judy just had to take off because she's being interviewed on the radio, but she's 5 years on September the 13th. I'm sure it seems a lot longer for Judy. She's done a ton of work. Upcoming meetings and events. Let's see. I was just talking with John Vickery earlier. We have what?
Wedding anniversary.
Did you have a wedding anniversary?
Next week, though.
Oh, well, I know.
But I'm not here next week.
Not
because it's my anniversary.
Should I call Larry and just remind him
No,
that
he
it's
knows.
next week? No. He's known for 2 months. John Vickery was saying we're going to have our Oktoberfest tickets for the opening Oktoberfest lunch this year, probably next week sometime maybe.
Should have them next
It's going to, sorry, John?
We'll have them at next week, Wednesday's meeting.
Fantastic. So at Concordia this year, just remember, a new location, new and improved location. We're sure we're going to have a better meal there and a nice venue, the classic German club. So it's going to be a great event. So we're looking forward to sell those tickets, and we have a slightly smaller venue this year, and we want to fill it. So by all means, try to sell as many tickets and tables as you can, and get back to John as quick as you can about how many tickets you're going to need. We have some really big news in the club. We just got a notice from the district. Kathy Dick was just here last year. She's our district governor, and we have received approval for matching funding, which is So this is for our Honduras project. We budgeted $10,000 US for that project, and we've been approved to get half of that cost funded by the district. And this is the first time this has happened since I've been a member, which is 15 years. And so a lot of credit goes to Dave Barth for slogging through that process. I know we had several members try for years, trying to figure out the whole process of getting this done, and it was horrible. Dave figured it all out, so kudos to Dave.
Good morning, Dave.
So that 5,000 US goes back in the pot for hopefully another project in the coming year. And so we're working on that at the board level to see what we can spend that extra 5,000 US on for another project in the coming year. So big event for this club, I think.
Ed, we did get district funds about 5 years ago for a project with Family and Children's Services locally.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't recall that, but it's not a common thing. Yeah, so good news. I don't know, Troy, are you still taking volunteers for the polo run Saturday? Sunday?
Yeah, I haven't heard anyone new, so I think he's got everything set up.
Okay, so I think we're ready to go. So Sunday morning, if you're signed up, see you bright and early at the museum. Right.
Troy, are you going to send out a reminder about that? Or?
Yep, you should have had it already.
There was an email that came out.
Yesterday.
Read your email.
Attaboy, there we go.
I'll have to go check what email
Anyway,
address that
that's
is.
ready to go this Sunday. We're going to have brunch afterwards for anybody who's hungry. Don't forget the district conference, September 23rd, Mississauga Living Arts Center, Peace Through Music. So if you can attend, it would be greatly appreciated. Our speaker for next week is going to be Bill Duce, I think it's called, D-U-C-E. He's the director of the KW Real Estate Association. I don't recall exactly what he's speaking about, but he should be interesting. Really? Oh, really? He's going to talk about the weather. So it should be interesting. You know, real estate has really skyrocketed in this region, both residentially and commercially. So I think that'll be interesting. Hockey helps the homeless. October 27th, we need people to help out with the bag drop. That's hauling the bags from the curb into the hockey rink to designated arenas. If you're available Friday, October the 27th, we'd love to have you. It's about a 3-hour gig early in the morning, and if you can help, send me an email directly. And is there any other news that any other members may have, or any other business for the club? And if not, get your tickets out for the highlight of the meeting. We have $336 in the pot this week.
I'm sitting beside Laura.
John's the one.
Laura, do you just want to come up? 953 is the first lucky winner. 953. Well, there we go. Well done. We rigged this, Karen, because you're a new member.
Yeah, just don't win.
There. Try to find the black one. No, not black. Sorry. You're now officially a member, having lost it. Number 906. There we go, 906. Yes, he had 906. Oh, green. Too bad. And 963. Jerome. Well, Jerome wanders up here to not flip the black marble. Not with the $336. We have Rotary trivia coming up. We've got a nice Skeleton Pinot Grigio, so nice greenish yellow marble.
Too bad, Drew.
Oh, just making it closer for you.
We've got about 25 still to go. Good fundraiser for the club. Okay, so the Rotary trivia for this week is, who was our club president exactly 10 years ago?
What year was that?
Exactly 10 years ago.
Paul Dietrich?
Nope.
Brad.
Very close.
Rick?
Nope.
No, it was.
Coffee Brothers.
Nope.
Moira.
Bingo. Karen got it. Karen likes white. I hope you like peanut, Karen.
Get the most.
Moira Taylor. I was talking with.
If Tony G was here, he would say that was his year, I think. Or was
No, I looked at the
Who was
website.
that?
Either that or the website's wrong.
But Moira was never here.
Well, you know what? I was talking with Moira at President's Night, and she was very complimentary, specifically to Brad. Of course, that was the year they were building. Moira was one of the big head honchos at St. Mary's, and they were building that huge addition on St. Mary's Hospital. And it happened to be the same year that she became president. So she, there weren't enough hours in the day sometimes to get everything done. So she said Brad was incredibly helpful that year. In fact, he offered to switch years, I think, with her, just to, if it was going to fit better. And she said, no. But so she said Brad really helped out a lot. Of course, Tony did also, because she was just burning the candle at both ends that year. So that was exactly 10 years ago today. And we have a spectacular speaker today. And Everton is going to tell you who that is right now.
Excuse my back.
Well, now we got your best side.
Our speaker today is our own John Rose. John is a graduate of WLU with an MBA in Strategy and Accounting, Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics and Political Science. He completed his Certified Management Accounting designation in 2007 and is president of Oak Ridge Holdings, Inc. It's a private equity property investment holdings company located here in Kitchener. While working in commercial property investments, property management, land development, solar panels, and furniture, John has maintained the position of managing director for Icy Waters from out of Whitehorse, Yukon. He first joined Icy Waters in April 2002 as director of finance and helped lead a corporation reorganization and culture shift, making the company cash flow positive and vibrant market leader in the Arctic Char aquaculture research and commercial development. Mr. Rose also serves as president of the Canadian Aqua.
Just say Kaya.
Kaya.
Nobody will remember anyway.
Alliance from 2007 to 2011, representing over $2 billion in related production, and helped to recreate Kaya as a member-driven organization dedicated to strongly promoting Canadian aquaculture. English was my weakest thing in school. To government and other key stakeholders. Prior to his current position, he held the position of financial and managing director with Rollcorp Limited, an international mineral trading and distribution company he helped create. John has considerable experience in strategy, operations, and governance, and has held several directory positions, including chair for private and non-profit organizations. Spent 8 years as a facilitator teacher with the Society of Management Accountants of Ontario, and has held part-time professor roles at Laurier and Conestoga College. John also maintains a long history of community involvement, serving as captain in his community's volunteer fire department. Today, John talks to us about aquaculture and his new farming, answering what we need to know or we're afraid to ask. John.
Well, I think the first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to keep this short and pretty simple because, I did it in the What About You back in November, so there won't be a lot about Icy Water specifically, but one of the things I've certainly noticed is when I sit at tables and we start talking to a fish, just incidentally today was tilapia, not Arctic char. This is rats of the sea compared to Arctic char. So to be very clear, not the same fish. Not that I'm biased.
Yeah, tell us what you really think.
Yeah, never one to mix words. But anyway, I am going to keep it relatively short about Icy Water specifically. But when I sit down with everybody, it's interesting how it does bring up table talk conversation about Arctic char. There's a lot of misnomers and mistruths and a lot of misinformation. And maybe just ignorance about it, and hopefully, I'm going to maybe talk about Icy Waters for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open the floor up and hopefully get you guys back to wherever it is you need to be relatively quickly today. I'm just going to move this over here so I can move it. So, as you know, it's in Whitehorse, which you can't really see because of the lights, but you kind of know where Whitehorse is. To get there, it's a 4.5. I'll let them figure it out. It's a 4.5-hour flight to Vancouver, and then you fly north about 2.5. How many people have been to Whitehorse? Okay, so there's a few of you, which is interesting. It's a fascinating place. Whitehorse, is like one of the manic depressive cities of Canada, because for 3 months of the year it's manic, and for the rest of the year it's depressed. So, and it is directly correlated to the weather. The history of the company is actually quite interesting. Originally, it was the Motes family, as you know, who used to own the KW Record. And when they sold the record back in the day, they decided that they wanted to do some really interesting investing. Unlike the typical venture cap companies or private equity firms, they sent letters. They wanted to invest in the North because they do have a bit of a, as you know, a philanthropic bent to them. And they felt, you know what, we want to do something different and create opportunity where opportunity at that time certainly wasn't being created. And so they sent letters out to both the Northwest Territories and the Yukon government at that time and asked, you know, what do you have? And Northwest Territories, nobody responded. The Yukon government responded. Most of them were lodges and you know, failed dreams of various people. And they went up and they looked at some of it. And then one was this aquaculture company. And it was a couple of DFO scientists who got together and decided to commercialize Arctic char, much the same way as we've enjoyed trout and salmon. They felt there was an opportunity for this, so they began using some of the species that they had cultivated at that time legally from wild stock, and began the company. So the Moses came in with some capital in '92, and then ultimately through some very interesting stories, some of which are sad as well, ended up with sole ownership in '93, '94. The Icy Waters in itself, and I'll talk about that a little later, itself has had a very difficult tenure through its years, which is coming up on whatever it is now, 25, 30 years, depending on what date you use. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But two main products, essentially, we provide to the world. That's the flesh, which you enjoyed, and we call it flesh, which is kind of a harsh word to say, but wonderful fillets that you enjoyed for lunch back a year ago, and we'll do again as we were talking. And we'll make it kind of a seafood extravaganza and bring in some other stuff, thanks to Ron Cottle, I'm sure, and Derek. And then, so that's one thing. Most of that is sold in the U.S., or sorry, in Canada, rather. We did have a U.S. operation for that years. We sold that in 2003 to the staff, and it was turned into something else. But primarily, all of our flesh product goes into Canada, 100% of it, generally speaking. 98% of it is fresh and flown daily, at least several times a week. And the second product, and probably the one that I'm most interested in, was, as you may have, as a bean counter, Ed, you'll appreciate this. The Idova is really the profit part of the game. The flesh, and I'm not letting you in a trade secret, it's tough to make money as farmers, as you may well know, but when you get into the genetic side of things, and really where the innovation and the biotechnology comes in is really the interesting part. And that's the area where the most potential long-term for the company is, providing the eggs to growers throughout the world. So there's a picture. It's not, again, because of the lights, it's not perfect, but this is pretty much Whitehorse for 10 months of the year. I lie. Actually, it's a desert climate, which means most people don't know. It doesn't get a ton of snow. It gets a lot of snow, but not what you would think, because it's north. It's going to be covered in snow, 6 feet high for 10 months of the year, something like that at all. It's a dry climate. I find I get nosebleeds a lot when I go up there. Very arid, and so there's not a ton of snow. We do get some anomaly years, but it is very cold, and it's a dry cold, if that means anything for you. But at minus 30, it's damn cold. It doesn't matter. And I've had the privilege of walking through that crunchy styrofoam snow in the middle of January. Sometimes it gets like minus 30 it doesn't go above minus 30 for like 3 weeks in a row. So that gets to the depressive side of Whitehorse. We have two, as I talk, two products, so there's two sides of the business. One is the hatchery. We're one of two Canadian hatcheries certified to ship over internationally, and we are a leader in broodstock development. So we're kind of the Hendrix turkeys of Char, as far as knowing what we do in selective breeding of the parents and using the genome to make those decisions. Now, keep in mind, this isn't genetic manipulation as much as knowing what traits that we want for commercial properties and then putting the parents together. So there's no genetic manipulation. That's one of the misinformations, is that fish farming is all genetically modified. These are not genetically modified organisms. I mean, unless your definition of genetically modified is knowing who the parents are, in which case you are genetically modified. Or it's a arranged marriage, I'm not sure. That's really what it is. Respected as a major source of ova internationally. We do have quite a reputation internationally. We have a lot of partners, and one of the things in the bio that I probably would love to expand upon, and that is the fact that when we did do a culture shift for Icy Waters in the early 2000s, to get more towards going towards biotechnology and research and development, none of this would have been possible with the great team that we had, the people up in Whitehorse, Derek, Sherry, my boss, one of the Bones family. The support was unbelievable in order to do this, and they were patient investors, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we work with a lot of different companies. Actually, Icy Waters, which you know, and then the new company that we just started actually within the last couple of months is Norgen Aquaculture. Norgen will be based out of New Brunswick, and Norgen is specifically going to be for the intellectual property and the genetics side of the business. And we're working with a company called Huntsman Ocean Sciences, who are doing quantitative genetics work on our fish. As we speak, in fact, they were just up in Whitehorse last week doing some research. They'll take that information back and, again, further help our program. We've been primarily involved in molecular genetics, and now we're getting into quantitative genetics, more of the maths is part of the science. So we're continually trying to improve in this and make a better product for our growers worldwide. And of course, there's other partners there as well. So we sell eggs throughout the world. Primarily, a lot goes into Europe, as you'll see here in a moment, and a lot into the Scandinavian countries, primarily Sweden, some in Denmark, and a lot in the general European area. Most of our customers have been with us a long time. You have to understand, our product is 3 times the price of our competitors. Okay, so I remember one guy saying, you guys are never going to succeed. And I said, well, why do you think that? He says, well, your price is way too high. I said, you're 3 times what it costs your competitor. I said, well, 2 rules. Number 1, I never apologize for my price, because a lot of work has gone into this, and my growers are successful as a result of the work that's going into this, so I don't apologize for my price. And the second thing, I don't think Rolex gives a good shit what Timex sells its watches for. We never talked again, but that's okay. Our production facility, like I said, and I don't want to suggest that it's not exciting. It can be very exciting, but it's farming. It is just farming at its very basic level. We take the young things, we grow them, and we make the big things, and then we harvest them. It's not, to me, it's not exciting, but to other people, it is very exciting. It's exciting to tour the plant. If you're ever in Whitehorse, by all means, let me know, and we'll get you a tour. It's really quite interesting to go through. Just incidentally, another thing, we are land-based, so that's another question I get at the table is, well, where do you grow these fish? We grow them in big swimming pools on the land. So they're not in ponds, they're not in lakes and pens like some of you know aquaculture to be. So it's called closed containment, but we can talk a little bit about that if you have a question later about specifically what that means. So as I mentioned, 98% of the fillets are shipped 52 weeks of the year, and is that picture of that frosty environment. It's not an easy job and not for the faint of heart to be harvesting fish at -30. Water doesn't particularly like it. People don't like being in water at -30. So we are synonymous for consistency and quality. A statistic I'm very proud of is that 98% of our fresh fillets, 150 metric tons a year, we have had one product complaint. I was talking to Derek about this, one product complaint that was directly attributed to us in the last 8 years. Okay, so when you're selling fresh product of any type, okay, to have that kind of metric is something I'm very proud of, and something that the team out there does a phenomenal job on. And that's the reason that even on the flesh side, we, in many cases, get $1.50 to $2 more a pound from a wholesale distribution market than what our competitors in Iceland do. And just to give you an idea, Iceland is the largest char producer in the world. They produce somewhere between 3,500 to 4,500 metric tons a year as compared to our 150. And we can still manage to get a $2 a pound premium on our price into the wholesale distribution marketplace, because when the chef opens up our container, the product is exactly the same. It's already been checked. It's perfect. We expect it to be perfect because he expects it to be perfect, and you, when you go in and pay $35 a plate, expect it to be perfect as well. So that's a picture actually of the manic part of the year. Just actually, that's probably in the fall. But as you can see, we're nestled in a bit of a valley and amongst the mountains, going up a hill. We are literally about 7 minutes from the airport in Whitehorse. We are in the airport city limits. One of the neat parts is Whitehorse is one of the biggest cities in Canada when you take landmass. Okay, they have extended their city limits out so far. So we are actually within the city limits, about 7 minutes from the airport, which is really important because we ship the eggs internationally. So being close to the airport is vitally critical to our success. So we're going to go into a little bit of Did You Know? I think I talked about this before, and if you can't read that, I'll talk about it. But this is an important part, and this is my mantra about aquaculture, and some of the things I've talked to board many of you with at the tables when we sat around at lunch. And that is, if you want to feed the world, okay, the best way to feed the world is with fish, in my opinion, as far as animal proteins go. And this is fundamentally why. Poultry, it takes approximately poultry's not bad, okay, but you got to do something with the waste, and we'll get to that. But poultry is 2 kilos of feed to make 1 kilo of poultry, so double, okay? That's efficient when you compare it to hogs. 6 kilos of feed to make 1 kilo of pork. All right. These numbers, by the way, I just updated today, and I can get you the source if you want it. Beef, 8.7 kilos of feed to make 1 kilo of beef. Okay, think about that the next time you eat your steak. All right. Salmonids, or specifically char, and although tilapia is not a salmonid and it eats a different diet, we'll talk about that as well than the salmonid does, is 1.2 kilos of feed to make 1 kilo of fish. So very efficient animal to feed people with. Now that having been said, people say, well, what's in the feed? We'll talk about that. But just getting back, the reason for that is simple. One, they're cold-blooded. All right, so they don't have any engine in them keeping themselves warm, so they're not using caloric intake to moderate their body temperature like warm-blooded animals do, which the rest do. And the second thing, which I found was interesting, is they don't have to fight gravity near as much as those of us that stand up. And those of us that get older find out that we have to fight gravity even more. Okay. But that I find a very interesting statistic. And I put that down there because as the world gets hungrier, and we talk a little bit about tilapia in Africa and microloans, which are very synonymous to what we were talking about, I think, when we were upstairs one time, about what this organization does. So wild stocks of fish will not be able to keep pace. Right now it's 50-50. 50% of the fish that is consumed in the world is by aquaculture and grown, and 50% is wild catch. And that number that is grown is going to go up, massively go up, because people are eating more as they become aware of the benefits. And that's a good thing. We can talk about that later if you'd like to. Environmental concerns will force the world to find alternate sources of protein. We can only, pardon me, negativity about it, but rape and pillage the world so far forward. We are going to have to farm the oceans to feed the planet. It's the end of it. And whether it be animal protein or whether it be kelp meal or other proteins, and we were talking about insects, we are going to have to think about different ways if we want to feed all the mouths on the planet, providing that storms don't knock a whole bunch off. Char are well suited for farming. So this gets into the PETA argument. They really love being really close. It's like a Japanese subway in the tanks. We grow our fish about 110 kilos of fish per cubic meter of water. Okay? The thing is, if we get them further apart, so, well, you can't do that, that's unfair to the animal. They eat each other. So I don't know where you are on the fair spectrum, but I don't see cannibalism as necessarily being all that fair. So we want to keep them dense, and they work really well in that, and they grow really well like that. As soon as you spread them out, they start becoming very precocious and difficult to get along with. Again, maybe like a Toronto subway. Icy Waters possesses, and this is by statement, possesses, in my opinion, and I think many of our growers, among the world's best broodstock, the world's best broodstock. And we continue to use selective breeding, and we'll continue to do that, as I mentioned earlier. So here's a few things I'm going to talk about here, and I'm going to put up a list, and you can pick the titles, and I'll talk about the story because we won't have time to talk about them all, nor do, well, I want to, but you won't want me to. So I'll read these out. You can pick kind of like, I don't know, a Jeopardy thing. Always read the financials before you accept the role. There's hire honest people even if they damage your office. Dead moose can stop people from getting to work. Wolves can nearly destroy a company. An axe-wielding vandal shouldn't be your best choice. Earthquakes don't help fish grow. remove all caribou heads from the premises before the board shows up, and pallets are useful. The dead moose. The dead. Okay, we'll go dead moose first. So my former vice president of agriculture has since gone on to Brighter Pastures in Nova Scotia. If you can believe Brighter Pastures can exist in Nova Scotia, nonetheless, I'm still bitter of him leaving. Great guy though. We were trying to get some stuff done. I think it was inventories, and I phoned him up. We had to do some counts, and counting fish in a tank is not an easy thing to do. You need bodies and people because you're literally netting them and putting them on a tray and counting them and going. We spotted that, if you can believe how wonderful that job was. But anyway, I phoned up and I said, well, we need these inventories because month end is happening. We have to get this information in. The board of directors want the financials. Da, 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 da. He says, I just don't have staff today. And I said, why? Well, I'll just make up a name. I can't remember who it was, but Bob can't make it in today. I said, what? Bob's a continual problem. Why can't Bob make it in today? He said, John, it's the truth because I've talked to the conservation officer. I said, why? A moose died on his driveway. I said, what? He says he literally can't drive out of his driveway because he's back in the bush and a moose died on the driveway and he can't drive over the moose or drive around the moose, so he can't get out of his house. Again, they do not teach you that in organizational behavior at Laurier, I can assure you. And how do you react to that? Can you get upset? Right? And then how do you explain to the board? Yeah, I can't get your financial statements. Why? Well, moose died. Okay, you don't usually see that in finance guys. What's another one? Yes, sir.
Caribou heads on the premises.
Okay, last year I had the board directors coming up. Actually, no, it was last fall. Wasn't it there? Yeah. Last fall. And we always have a problem up there, and it's a bit of a culture thing. They have dogs everywhere. I can get into it. We don't have the time. But anyway, the place generally, because it's a farm too. It's not our idea of clean here in southwestern Ontario. It's a farm. And so when I go up there before the board, I tend to get there a couple of days before because I want things tidied up, sweep up, you know, just the same as any office or in fact, if you had the directors coming in or financiers for that matter. So I went ahead and I was walking down by the hatchery building, which has an apartment upstairs where the hatchery manager lives. We can go into detail about that. But nonetheless, he walks down. I was walking around and I looked at this thing on the ground, and it was a severed caribou head.
On the ground?
On the ground, just sitting there. Eyes still in it, bloody mess at the bottom where it had been severed, and it was just sitting there. And I'm like, why is there a severed caribou head? So I asked the hatchery manager. He said, well, my dog likes to play with it. I don't know if you guys know who Tupper Causey is, but he was my organizational behavior prof at Laurier, and I wanted to go back to him and say, you never told me how to deal with it. But anyway, yeah, so that's one of the things you have to deal with. You have to go up there, and it's a different culture. And it's
wolves, the wolves.
Another one, what's
wolves.
that?
Don wants the wolves.
The wolves. Okay, so we had some issues with our regulatory officials up there because there's a fair amount of the government up there wants to make Whitehorse a park. And we were well within our limits, but they were causing us problems. We had to go for a new license, and they wanted a public hearing that only one person from the public actually showed up to, but I won't get into that detail. Not that I have any scars and bitterness towards it. So we were supposed to go in. We met there. I was with Sherry, who's my boss, myself. We were developing the entire case as to what we're going to make to the water board in a public forum. At that point, we didn't know one person to show up. And we were developing the case, and literally, we had a room which was literally a war room. Okay, we had all notes and things set up, and we were preparing this incredible, like, rebuttal to some of the issues that they are facing. And we got there in the morning. I had an eye infection, incidentally, at the time, probably the stress. And so I'm just a mess. And we're setting up, and I'm getting the computer loaded, and we're putting all the PowerPoints together for this presentation. And Jonathan Lucas, the then VP, as I mentioned earlier, who went to Nova Scotia, came in, and he says, and he's upset. And I said, what's going on? He said, well, Laura, my wife, who lives on premises in the general manager's house, had a few dogs mushing, because they're very big into the mushing. Had a few dogs on loan from another musher, and wolves got into the compound and killed 3 of the 4 dogs, and very maimed the last one. Should have probably killed him. And so he said, I can't meet. Like, I have to attend to my wife. you can see the value in that, like, because it's a very difficult situation. As is the current and forward employment of the existing operation. So again, one of those balances between we are going for our very lives in the case coming up here today versus the 3 dogs. Again, they don't prepare you on the ethical and moral basis of whether or not that's important or not. So yeah, so anyway, he did a really good job. He went and tended to his wife, tended to the dogs, and then came back and met with us later that afternoon.
And John, one person showed up from the public. Was that from the public, or?
One person showed up to the public hearing, yeah.
Paul and I would celebrate if that was the case.
Yes. Well, I've actually accompanied you guys on the other part of my job, and I would also celebrate that as well. But it was a sham show, and I could spend 3 hours just talking to you about the regulatory agencies up in Whitehorse and how, quite frankly, and with the true sense of the word, just ignorant today. They thought phosphate and phosphorus are the same thing. They're not. One's a compound, one's elemental. It's very different. Those of you who have a science background, the thing is the regulatory agencies out there don't have a science background, which is really interesting to work with, but nonetheless. Any more on that?
Yeah, I just want to hear about the top one, financials.
Great question. Yeah.
Oh, you would.
So,
counter over there?
as you heard in my bio, my background is I worked with my dad. We started a company back in mid-90s, sourcing and distributing trace minerals into the animal feed premix. Made it sound a whole lot more exciting than it really is. But my dad had been in the business for 40 years. We went out on our own, started this business. And then I decided that I want to go back to school, and I got my MBA, and I came out. I was the poster child for a bad interview. I was probably maybe too honest. I don't know. I hadn't had a lot of interview experience because I came out of university and got jobs and it was easy. And then all of a sudden I'm without the skills to interview. So I went in and I was really having a really tough time finding a job. It was the early 2000s. The .com implosion had happened. Everybody was very scared. There weren't a lot of people hiring. I went for some tremendously terrible interviews. One was at Manulife. No offense to those of you who have worked there or know people working there. It was the worst experience of my life. I would have hung myself from a cubicle. And no disrespect to the people interviewing, it was a very challenging interview. And I had made a decision. I went out with my dad and we talked, and I said, you know what, I'm going to go back. I'm going to become a firefighter. So I was writing for Brantford to become a firefighter at that point. Probably one of the most educated in a completely different field. Anyway, I was going to write that, and then this job interview came up. And they said, and I didn't want to work in agriculture because I was coming out of that. And they said, well, it's not. It's aquaculture. Okay. I said, well, okay, sounds different. So I showed up, and the interview, I remember the posting said, you know, great opportunity, a facility in Whitehorse. I thought, well, that's kind of cool, right? I'm the Whitehorse, I'm not going to have to work there. I work at Kitchener, so that's all right. And then another facility in Oakville. And it didn't say Washington. So I was assuming that I was going to go down the highway. Yeah, well, it was Oakville, Washington, which is on the other side of the other side. But anyway, so I remember showing up. That was the story. I just tell you the story. I showed up, and you know, your first day, and you're reading all the manuals and finding out what you got yourself into. And I saw the financial statements, and on $2.5 million worth of sales, we were losing $1 million a year. I had never in my life experienced anything like that because I've always been profitable. Working with my dad, working with the companies before that, I've always been profitable. I can't tell you how my guts just tore because I didn't know how long I had. But that being said, phenomenally incredible experience. And I say this to my bosses all the time. You can come in. I'd be disappointed, but if you came in tomorrow and fired me, the only word I could say is thank you because of the incredible experiences I've had working for this company and this family over the last 15 years. I get to play in a whole different field, as you guys have seen me, Bill and others. So it's been just an amazing experience working for a family who it's really not about the last dollar earned either, which is a fascinating experience. And when I was going through my MBA, and I remember some of the other guys who were always, you know, we're heading down Bay Street's where we're going, Toronto, the Trump-esque kind of work that they wanted, and I was like, you know, I was always maybe a little bit not quite there, and they always said, geez, man, you're gonna have a hard time finding a job, which was true. I did have a very hard time finding a job, but then, some people shined on me, and I got an opportunity to work for this family, and with great people like Derek and the others, and the team that we have. And every day I get up, Steph, not every day is wonderful. Steph is my witness, but certainly, and Lord knows the region and their bullshit sometimes of the property development side is a whole new world, part of my language. But it's been a really great experience. So let's talk about aquaculture for a few more minutes. Any questions you have in regards to fish farm? Yes, sir.
If everything's land-based, why do you still continue to do business or do all your breeding and stuff in such a remote location?
Excellent question. Many people say, why waivers? And I go, great, I have no idea. No. The reason why, because moose prevent people from coming to work. That's one. But no, the water source is critical to all aquaculture. The broodstock I would never leave out of whitehorse because it's very close to mimicking their natural environment. So the light spectrums that come in and their breeding regime is very good for the fish, and they're very healthy. The water system that we have is pathogen-free artesian well water. We pump nothing on site, so it's all gravity fed as well. So it's hugely important. The cost of producing each additional egg is relatively low. Okay, so the real cost is in the science side, which is not done in whitehorse. Okay, the actual production of the egg costs are relatively low in whitehorse, other than staff and the issues that we talked about jokingly here. So we'll keep the broodstock down. Producing the flesh is not a good idea. It costs us just shy of $10,000 to get one load of feed to whitehorse. That's just transport.
And what feed is that?
The feed comes out of Skredding, which is an aquaculture company, Nutrico. They make the feed in Washington, or in Vancouver at their mill. Composition of the feed, Arctic char are carnivorous fish. They're not as, maybe, depending on how you look at it and what your vantage point is, maybe not as efficient in a sense as tilapia, which eat anything. But so there still needs to be a fish product, although technology now, with a lot of research that's been going on in protein sources, we've greatly lessened the requirement for fish in, fish out. So now we use a lot of chicken, actually poultry, meals to go into the fish. But there's only so much of that you can do because these fish, are hundreds of thousands of years evolved to live off of other fish. So at some point there's a curve where you start causing other issues, health issues, and their guts aren't set up to necessarily to digest these other proteins and soybean meals and all the rest of it. So you have to have a balance, and there's a lot of work going on that to lessen that. Now that being said, I was just reading a thing from PETA before I came in just to kind of back up some of the stuff I'm saying, and PETA has on their website it takes 5 kilos of feed to make 1 kilo of 5 kilos of fish to make 1 kilo of fish feed. It doesn't. Okay, it maybe does 5 kilos of fish, but that assumes all those 5 kilos are being minced up and put into fish feed. They're not. A lot of the fish meal that goes into fish feed, okay, is the heads and racks and offal that come off of the fish that you're eating from the wild catch fishery. Okay, so you're eating cod. Okay, well, the parts of the cod that you're not eating are going in and being rendered into food. So it actually can be efficient. You just got to be careful, and Skredding has done an immeasurable, as most of the industry has, an immeasurable amount of work to try and lessen the impact. The other thing is too, they can only take through their associations, they can only take from sustainable fisheries, which has dramatically impacted the price of fish feed and dramatically impacted the price of the end product that you consume as well, because there are some years that for scientific reasons there just aren't enough. There just isn't enough fish. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
John, you mentioned before the Arctic char is the Rolex, the tilapia is the rat.
I'm being
I don't know.
facetious.
In terms of the salmon and trout, where would they?
Salmon and trout are great, but they've been domesticated much longer than char has been. Char's maybe, in our case, about 6-7 generations out of the wild. So we're still dealing with a very wide sizes version of Arctic char. All right, but generally speaking, I mean, it's all personal preference at this stage of the game. Salmon, Atlantic salmon, that was a good question that was raised last week. There was an escape. Those of you heard about the escape. We know Glenn Cook, who owns Cook Aquaculture in New Brunswick, and he's a very good Very good person. Very community-minded, has donated a significant amount back into Black's Harbor. Is that where it is in New Brunswick? But anyway, really good guy. And he had just bought those assets from a company that had gone bankrupt and was in the process of upgrading a lot of those pens that were on the Pacific to the Atlantic technology. Of course, you can imagine trying to grow fish in the North Atlantic. Okay, they have some really amazing technology to maintain these farms in incredible nor'easters and all the rest of it. Well, they were going to be transferring that technology to the west where these storms are a lot more calm and not as difficult, and that didn't happen and in time, and they lost that farm. Now, Atlantic salmon, just so you know, a lot of Atlantic salmon that is reared in the Pacific is triploid, which they put the eggs under pressure, and I can get into that detail if you ever wanted to, but at any point they're sterile, okay? So they can't breed. And if those that were, and I don't know about Glenn Cook's necessarily, his product there on the West Coast as to whether it was sterile or not, Atlantic salmon and Pacific salmon do not generally commingle and do not breed, okay? So there's no interbreeding. When you talk about, okay, well the next issue is disease vectoring. Okay, these fish, they were in intense aquaculture facilities. Imagine a for-profit company promoting diseased fish. Probably not likely. Okay, these fish, generally speaking, on these farms are very well regulated, and they're very well regulated. We have the CFI getting down our neck. In fact, aquaculture in Canada, this is an interesting fact, is regulated by no less than 73 pieces of legislation. All but one don't even mention aquaculture. Only the Bank Act in Canada mentions aquaculture. Simon, you find that interesting. So we are regulated under this phenomenal amount of legislation that doesn't actually, or was never set up to deal with us. All right? Canada has incredible potential, both economically, culturally, with some Aboriginal bands, as well as environmentally, okay, and philanthropically, to grow a lot more product. All right? And we have the science, we have the know-how, we have the intelligence, we have all of the things going for it, and we're stopped because, and I literally sat in front of an MP in Ottawa when I was president of CAIA, and I was lobbying on behalf of Canadian Aquaculture Industry Alliance to allow us more opportunities. And he literally said, but do you know how many calls I get about people who don't like fish farms on the West Coast? I said, well, how many calls have you got? She says, I've got 4 calls. I said, I'm sorry, did you say 4? He says, I got 4 calls in the last 6 months of people who don't like aquaculture. It's a $2 billion industry, most of it in rural areas of Canada that don't have a lot of other options for jobs. Okay? So keep that in mind. Anyway, I know time, I can go on. You could, I give you a certificate when you're done. Yeah?
One question. A while ago, I read a bunch of things that said that farm fish didn't have the same nutrient quality as wild fish. And so
yeah, you're absolutely right in many ways. You know why?
Please.
Because farm fish don't grow in the effluent of paper mills. So they don't pick up a lot of those nutrients. Any other questions? If you want to eat, hey, if you want to contribute to the extinction of the fish in this world, and if you want to eat a fish that was not regulated in the water it was grown at, by all means, have some of those wonderful wild salmon that are available.
And based on the fact the Crown Plaza has served tilapia both times you've spoken, I hope you don't speak again anytime. It was a very interesting talk, and we'll look forward to the real fish being served another time. Yeah. You know the drill.
I do.
55-year-old male in India.
Excellent.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you very much. Thanks for asking me. Hope I didn't worry.
That's one of the best talks we've had. Nothing else for the good of Rotary? Meeting adjourned.